The Body Knows episode 19, Dissociation as Survival. Welcome back to The Body Knows. On this episode, we're going to explore a state of being that many of us know intimately, even if we haven't always had the words for it. Dissociation. When the body chooses silence over struggle, dissociation is the body's way of surviving the unsurvivable. It's what happens when fight, flight, and even freeze no longer feel possible, when the system is so overwhelmed that the only option left is to disconnect, to step back, to numb, to fragment, to drift away, while the body keeps breathing, keeps existing, keeps enduring. It's a subject I feel compelled to approach carefully, because dissociation can be subtle, almost invisible at times, and yet it can also be profound, even life-saving. Many people hear the word and imagine only the extreme: split personalities, amnesia, total blackouts. But dissociation wears many faces. Sometimes it's as simple as staring out the window in the middle of an argument, feeling your mind float somewhere else, while your body sits motionless in the chair. Sometimes it's losing whole hours to scrolling or driving without noticing landmarks. Sometimes it's the sudden sense that your body isn't yours, or that the world around you isn't real. And crucially, dissociation is not a weakness. It is not a failure. It is the nervous system doing its job, protecting you when no other option feels safe. Let's begin the physiology of dissociation. To understand dissociation, we need to revisit the nervous system survival map. Most of us are familiar with fight or flight, the rush of adrenaline, the pounding heart, the readiness to move or defend. We've also explored freeze, the momentary stilling of the body, like a deer caught in headlights. But when stress is overwhelming, prolonged, or utterly inescapable, the body reaches for another state, dorsal vagal shutdown. This response is governed by the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, specifically the dorsal vagus nerve. Unlike the ventral vagus, which supports social connection, calmness, and safety, the dorsal vagus pulls the system into collapse. Heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, the body becomes heavy, sluggish. The brain dampens awareness, reducing the flood of sensory input. It is, in essence, the body's off switch when all other survival strategies have failed. In evolutionary terms, we can see this response in animals that play dead. The possum that goes limp when threatened by a predator is enacting a form of dissociation. The gazelle that falls motionless under the paw of a lion is not giving up. Its body is numbing itself against the inevitability of pain. Humans carry the same circuitry. When a child grows up in an environment where conflict, shouting, or even violence is a constant, and fighting back is dangerous, fleeing is impossible, and freezing only delays the inevitable, the nervous system learns to dissociate. It learns to dampen awareness, to shut down emotions, to float away from the body. And this isn't a conscious decision. It's automatic, a built-in survival reflex. Dissociation versus everyday detachment. It's important to make a distinction here. Dissociation exists on a spectrum. On the milder end, we have everyday forms of detachment: daydreaming in class, zoning out in a boring meeting, losing track of time while scrolling through your phone. These are normal, adaptive states, ways the brain takes a break from overstimulation or monotony. But deeper dissociation feels different. It's not simply boredom or distraction, it's a disconnection. You might look in the mirror and not recognize your own face. You might be speaking words and hearing them as though they come from someone else's mouth. You might walk through your home and feel like it's a stage set, unreal and foreign. This is depersonalisation and derealisation, two of the most common forms dissociation takes. What unites them is the nervous system's intention to reduce the felt impact of experience, to soften or sever the connection between self and sensation, because sensation itself has become too dangerous to bear. Why the body chooses dissociation? So why does the body sometimes shut down instead of fighting? The answer lies in perceived possibility. When the nervous system scans for safety or danger, a process known as neuroception, it constantly evaluates whether action is possible. If fighting could succeed, the system mobilizes energy. If fleeing could save you, adrenaline pushes you to run. If neither is possible, but a predator might overlook you, the body freezes. But when danger feels both inescapable and overwhelming, when no action seems possible, the body's last resort is to dissociate. It says, if I can't get out and I can't stop it, I won't feel it. This may be a momentary survival during acute trauma, but for many, dissociation becomes a learned pattern. The nervous system, having discovered this solution, deploys it again and again whenever stress feels unbearable, even in contexts where the danger is no longer present. Imagine a child who grows up in a volatile household. Arguments erupt without warning, voices rise, doors slam. That child learns early on that fighting back is punished, fleeing is impossible, and freezing is only temporary. Dissociation becomes the go-to strategy. As an adult, that same person may find themselves spacing out during conflict with a partner or shutting down in the middle of a workplace confrontation. Their body is not responding to the present alone. It is responding to the echoes of the past. Dissociation as a double-edged sword, here lies the paradox. Dissociation protects, but it also costs. It can preserve life, shield the psyche, and carry someone through the worst moments. But it also fragments memory, erodes authenticity, and distances us from both ourselves and others. This is why survivors often struggle with a painful contradiction. On the one hand, they know dissociation keeps them alive. On the other hand, they feel betrayed by it, cut off from presence, intimacy, and agency. Dissociation becomes both friend and enemy, both savior and thief. Personal reflections. I know this paradox intimately. There were times in my own life when the pressure of conflict or expectation pushed me into states I couldn't explain. Outwardly, it looked like silence, like I had nothing to say. Inside, it felt like my mind was floating just above my body, watching events unfold from a distance. Sometimes hours later, I could barely recall what had been said, only that I'd been there but not there. At first, I thought this was a failure, that I lacked courage, that I had no backbone. But over time, as I learned more about the nervous system and trauma, I realized this was not weakness. This was protection. My body had decided that the safest way through was to remove me from the line of fire. It's a realization that brings both relief and grief. Relief because it reframes dissociation as a survival skill, not a defect. Grief because it shows how often I lived outside myself, how many moments were half-lived, how many connections were muted by absence. Dissociation and culture dissociation is not just an individual phenomenon. We see it in culture too. Whole communities numb themselves to unbearable realities. Think of societies where violence or poverty is widespread and survival demands emotional detachment. Think of the way endless news cycles of war, disaster, and crisis can leave viewers emotionally flat, scrolling through catastrophe with glazed eyes. In this way, dissociation becomes not just personal but collective. It is a mirror of how humans cope when the unbearable becomes routine, reframing survival. And so, as we begin this episode, the message I want to plant is this: dissociation is not failure. It is survival. The body attempts to protect life when no other path seems possible. But, and this is what the rest of our journey will explore, survival is not the same as living. The task of healing is not to erase dissociation, but to understand it, honor it, and slowly create the conditions where it is no longer the only option. To teach the nervous system that safety can exist without collapse. To reclaim presence piece by piece. This is where we'll go in the parts ahead, from depersonalisation and derealisation to everyday spacing out, to the costs and possibilities of reconnection. We'll map out dissociation as both shield and wound, and we'll explore what it means to walk the long, patient path back into the body, back into the self. Depersonalisation, derealisation, and the many faces of dissociation. Dissociation wears many faces. Some are fleeting, barely noticeable, while others can dominate whole chapters of life. To truly understand it, we need to explore its main forms: depersonalisation, derealisation, and dissociative amnesia, along with the countless smaller variations that slip between them. Each reflects the body's attempt to protect the self, to buffer against pain, and to preserve a sense of survival in the face of overwhelm. Depersonalisation. The self at a distance. Depersonalisation is the experience of being detached from yourself. It's as though you're watching your own life unfold through a pane of glass. Words come out of your mouth, but they don't quite feel like yours. Hands move across the desk, but they seem foreign, like they belong to someone else. Neurologically, depersonalisation is linked to changes in the prefrontal cortex and limbic system. Studies show decreased activity in the amygdala, the center for fear and emotion, alongside heightened activity in the prefrontal regions responsible for detached analysis. In simple terms, the emotional brain dims while the thinking brain overengages, producing a strange sense of calm disconnection. This is why many describe depersonalisation not as panic but as emptiness. It can feel eerily calm, as though the system has numbed itself to avoid the storm. In evolutionary terms, it makes sense. If a predator has you pinned and you cannot escape, feeling nothing may be safer than feeling terror. But depersonalisation doesn't only happen in extreme trauma. Many people experience it during high stress, chronic anxiety, or after exhaustion. For example, someone giving a presentation might suddenly feel like they're watching themselves from above, disconnected from their own words. Another might walk through a familiar environment and suddenly feel robotic, their body moving on autopilot while their awareness floats behind. I remember moments like this in my own life. In heated situations or under pressure that felt unbearable, my awareness would drift just behind my body, as though I were an observer rather than a participant. On the outside, I appeared calm. On the inside, I was absent, and the absence itself brought shame, as if detachment was cowardice. But it wasn't cowardice. It was the body choosing numbness over terror, silence over chaos. Derealisation. The world turns unreal if depersonalisation is the detachment from self. Derealisation is the detachment from the world. The environment itself feels distorted. Colours may seem too bright or too dull. Sounds echo strangely. Time slows down or speeds up. The world appears dreamlike, artificial, staged. Researchers connect derealisation to altered functioning in the visual and auditory cortices, as well as disruptions in the thalamus, the brain's relay station for sensory input. Under extreme stress, the system filters perception differently, muting or distorting input to soften the impact. The result, reality feels unreal. People often describe walking through familiar places as though they're strangers there. A childhood home might feel like a film set. A friend's voice may sound distant, as though played through a speaker. Everyday objects can look subtly wrong, as if the world itself has slipped a few inches out of alignment. One striking feature of derealisation is the conviction of unreality. Even when someone logically knows that their environment hasn't changed, their body insists that it has. This conflict between rational thought and embodied perception can be deeply unsettling. I felt echoes of this in times of high overload. There were moments when I would step into a room and everything felt slightly off, the air too thin, the walls too sharp, the voices too distant. It wasn't that I believed I was hallucinating. It was that my body had changed its filter, making the world feel alien. Looking back, I realized this was my nervous system protecting me. By making the environment unreal, it was buffering me from the full weight of what was happening. Dissociative amnesia, the vanishing of memory. Another form dissociation can take is memory loss dissociative amnesia. When trauma overwhelms the system, the hippocampus, responsible for sequencing and storing memory, can shut down. The result is fragmented or missing recollection. This isn't the same as ordinary forgetting. It's not that the memory fades gradually with time. It's that the memory is never fully encoded, or it's locked away, inaccessible to conscious recall. Survivors often describe gaps, entire conversations, hours, or even days missing from their narrative. On one level, this can protect against unbearable recollection. If the event cannot be remembered, it cannot shatter the self, but the cost is high. Memories often resurface later, triggered by sensory cues, a smell, a sound, a phrase, flooding the survivor with images or feelings they didn't know they carried. In my own journey, I've encountered something similar with emotional flashbacks. Even when I couldn't recall every detail of past events, my body remembered. A tone of voice, a look, a slam of a door, and suddenly I was back in the old overwhelm, flooded with the same fear or anger. It showed me that amnesia does not mean erasure. The body keeps its own archive, the continuum of dissociation. It's helpful to think of dissociation not as an off switch, but as a continuum. At one end are everyday experiences like zoning out, daydreaming, or going on autopilot. In the middle lie depersonalisation and derealisation, more intense, often distressing states. At the far end are dissociative amnesia and identity fragmentation. Most of us move along this continuum at different times. It's not a rare disorder affecting only a few. It's a human capacity built into our nervous systems designed to protect. The challenge comes when dissociation becomes chronic, when it's no longer an occasional refuge, but a default state, cutting someone off from presence, intimacy, and agency. Philosophical reflections, philosophers have long grappled with the nature of self and world, often describing experiences that echo dissociation. Descartes spoke of the split between mind and body, as though the self could stand apart from its own flesh. Heidegger described alienation from the world as unheimlich, the uncanny sense of not being at home. Buddhist teachings on Maya, the illusory nature of the world, resonate with derealization's dreamlike quality. What's striking is that dissociation blurs the line between pathology and philosophy. When the body withdraws from reality, is it malfunctioning, or is it revealing, in a distorted form, the fragility of what we call real and self? Modern psychology frames dissociation as a response to trauma, but culture has sometimes framed it as mystical. Vision quests, trance states, and shamanic journeys all involve altered perception and self-detachment. The difference lies in context and consent. Dissociation from trauma is imposed, unwanted, and disempowering. Dissociation in ritual is chosen, guided, and often healing. Lived experience. Dissociation in conflict, consider a scenario. A person is in conflict, perhaps with a partner or authority figure. Voices rise. The nervous system detects danger. Fighting feels risky. Flight feels impossible. Freeze holds for a moment. And then the body shifts into dissociation. From the outside, they may look calm, too calm. They may stare blankly, their face flat, their voice monotone. Inside, they feel detached, as though floating above the room or trapped behind a screen. Words become distant. The body feels heavy. The world loses colour. Later, when asked what happened, they struggle to recall the details. They may even question themselves. Was I exaggerating? Did I make it up? But what happened was real. It was the nervous system's protective switch flicking on. This scenario is familiar to me. I've lived through moments where conflict pressed so heavily that my body left before I could. I wasn't choosing silence, I was surviving. And the silence cost me authenticity, cost me expression, but it also kept me safe. The paradox of protection and loss, this is the paradox we must hold. Dissociation is both salvation and theft. It shields against pain, but it also takes presence. It preserves life, but it fragments memory. It carries us through trauma, but it distances us from healing. Recognizing this paradox is essential. Survivors who dissociate often carry shame, believing they are weak, defective, or cowardly. But when we see dissociation as a survival strategy, one written into our biology, we replace shame with compassion. The body was doing what it had to do. At the same time, acknowledging the cost allows us to seek reconnection, to honor the body's wisdom while working toward presence. Healing lies in holding both truths. Thank you for protecting me, and now I want to live more fully again. Let's pause with a simple truth. Dissociation is not an enemy. It is an ally forged in crisis, but like many allies of survival, it can overstay its welcome, becoming a barrier to living fully. In the parts ahead, we'll explore how dissociation shows up in everyday life, how culture normalizes numbing, and how survivors can slowly reclaim presence. But for now, remember, if you've ever felt detached from yourself or your world, you are not broken. You are carrying one of humanity's oldest survival strategies, and that is a truth worth honoring. Spacing out during conflict, a nervous system script conflict. For many people, it's a moment of intensity, but also of possibility. Words fly, voices rise, and there's a chance to argue your side, to fight for your point of view. But for those of us shaped by trauma, by nervous system overwhelm, conflict often doesn't unfold this way. Instead of rising into a fight or escaping into flight, the body sometimes takes another path, dissociation. In this part of the episode, we'll go step by step through what happens when the body spaces out during conflict. We'll look at the physiology, the psychology, the philosophy, and the personal reality of dissociation as it shows up in the heat of human tension. And we'll see why what looks like silence, detachment, or even compliance is, at its core, the body's way of surviving when survival feels impossible. Step 1. The spark. Conflict begins. Conflict rarely explodes out of nowhere. Often, it begins with a spark, a word said in the wrong tone, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive gesture. The body notices before the conscious mind does. Neuroception, that subconscious scanning for safety or danger, kicks in. The amygdala lights up. The sympathetic nervous system surges. The heart rate quickens. Muscles tighten in preparation. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, preparing the body to act. At this point, the nervous system is mobilized, ready for fight or flight. But here's where history intervenes. For a child raised in environments where conflict meant danger, these sparks are not neutral. They carry the weight of memory. A slammed door in the present carries the echoes of shouting in the past. A harsh tone in a classroom replays the fear of a parent's reprimand. Neuroception does not just assess the present, it draws on the body's entire archive. So before the conscious self can frame a response, the body is already bracing, already on guard, already flooded. Step 2. Options collapse. At this point, in theory, the nervous system has choices. If fighting back seems possible and safe, adrenaline drives the body toward confrontation. If escape is viable, cortisol and adrenaline drive the legs to run. If neither feels possible, but there's a chance to go unnoticed, the body freezes still, tense, waiting. But what happens when none of these seems possible? This is where dissociation enters. For someone conditioned by childhood trauma, fighting may feel forbidden, punished by authority, and unsafe in the family. Flight may feel impossible. Where could a child run? Freeze may only invite more scrutiny. Why are you so quiet? Answer me when I talk to you. The nervous system, perceiving no way out, reaches for its final option, shutdown. The dorsal vagal system activates. Energy drains from the limbs, awareness dulls. The body becomes heavy, the mind begins to drift. What looks like spacing out is not laziness. It is survival. Step 3, the drift. Dissociation takes hold. Here's where dissociation reveals its many forms. In one version, the person might feel themselves floating above the room, watching the argument unfold as though they are a spectator. This is depersonalisation, the self detached from the body. In another, the world itself may turn unreal. Voices echo strangely, faces look distorted, and the room feels dreamlike. This is derealisation, the environment detached from the self. In still another, the moment may vanish altogether. Later, the person recalls only fragments or nothing at all. This is dissociative amnesia. The hippocampus, overwhelmed, is failing to encode memory. I remember moments like this in my own life. Arguments that escalated so fast my body had no time to process. I begin by trying to hold my ground, maybe even voicing that I was struggling. But if those pleas went unheard, if my wants and needs were dismissed again and again, something inside would give way. My nervous system, stretched to breaking, would collapse into shutdown. On the outside, I'd go still quiet. To others, it may have looked like defiance. Why won't you answer me? Inside, it was survival. My mind had stepped back to endure what my body could not resist. Step 4. The aftermath. Once the conflict ends, the body doesn't simply snap back. Dissociation lingers. The nervous system, having collapsed, takes hours or days to recalibrate. For me, this often meant headaches, fatigue, and irritability. Sometimes tears would come later, when the body was finally able to feel what it had numbed. Other times there was only emptiness, a flatness that could stretch on. And here's the cruelest part. In many environments, the shutdown itself is judged. A child who goes quiet during scolding is called disrespectful. An adult who spaces out during conflict is accused of avoidance. The survivor, already carrying the weight of overwhelm, is now shamed for the very strategy that kept them alive. This is what I've called double punishment. First, punished by the overwhelming itself. Second, punished by others' misunderstanding of the body's response. Examples across life. This scenario plays out in countless ways. Let's look at a few weaving in both research and my own reflections. In childhood, a teacher raises their voice. The child, already primed by a history of harsh parenting, feels their stomach drop, their mind drifts. They stare at the floor. The teacher accuses them of not listening, but the child is listening too much. Their system has simply shut down to survive. In relationships, a partner's words cut deep. Instead of yelling back or walking out, the survivor goes blank. Their partner says, "You don't care. You never fight for us." But the blankness is not apathy. It is protection. Inside, the survivor is overwhelmed, their nervous system offline. In cult dynamics, love bombing followed by sudden criticism. The member, unable to fight the authority or flee the group, dissociates. They smile faintly, nod comply, even as their body floats elsewhere. To others, it looks like obedience. To the body, it is survival. In an adult work environment, a boss dismisses input in a meeting. The employee, who has lived through years of invalidation, spaces out. They sit quietly while the meeting continues. Later, they're told they lack initiative. But initiative is impossible when the body has collapsed into shutdown. The inversiverse and dissociation in the inversiverse, I explored how indoctrination and control exploit the nervous system. Dissociation is part of this. Systems of power, whether cults, governments, or workplaces, know consciously or not that overwhelming silences people. When the body dissociates, resistance evaporates. This is why gaslighting works. This is why shame is weaponized. This is why constant stress and fear are projected through the media. When the nervous system collapses, people stop fighting. They stop fleeing. They stop resisting. They space out, comply, and endure. Dissociation in this sense is not just personal survival, but a tool of social control. Reflections from my inner child was broken. In my inner child was broken. I reflected on how often my nervous system collapsed as a child. Meltdowns, shutdowns, and selective mutism were all signs of a body pushed beyond tolerance. When adults told me to explain what was wrong, I couldn't. It wasn't that I wouldn't. It was that I literally couldn't. My voice was gone. My awareness had retreated. To be pressed for answers only deepened the pain. This is what many don't understand. Dissociation is not a choice. It's not manipulation, laziness, or avoidance. It is automatic, biological, built into the fabric of survival. And yet, like many survivors, I also carried shadow behaviors. Times when I lashed out in anger, when I pushed others away, when I acted in ways I later regretted. These too were survival, the overflow of energy trapped by too much shutdown. I don't share these to paint myself as a saint or martyr. I share them because they reveal the duality of trauma. Dissociation is not clean. It is messy, paradoxical, human. The philosophy of absence philosophers and mystics have often explored the idea of absence. What does it mean to be present? And what does it mean to vanish from oneself? In dissociation, we glimpse the fragility of presence. The self can slip away, not in death, but in retreat. The world can blur, not because it changes, but because perception withdraws. This is unsettling, but also revealing. Dissociation shows us that presence is not guaranteed. It is a fragile negotiation between body, mind, and world. And when that negotiation breaks under pressure, absence takes its place. In Buddhism, the idea of anatta, no self, resonates here. In trauma, no self is not enlightenment but survival. In philosophy, it is an idea. In dissociation, it is a lived necessity. Step-by-step nervous system breakdown. Let's pull this all together in a step-by-step map of what happens in conflict leading to dissociation. 1. Neuroception detects danger. Harsh tone, raised voice, slammed door. 2. Amygdala fires, fear and threat detection engage. 3. Sympathetic arousal, adrenaline, cortisol, rapid heartbeat, muscle tension. 4. Fight assessed and dismissed. Too risky, punished in the past. 5. Flight assessed and dismissed. No escape available. 6. Freeze attempted, stillness, waiting, hoping danger passes. 7. Freeze fails. Attention intensifies, scrutiny grows, pressure mounts. 8. Dorsal vagal shutdown. Parasympathetic collapse, blood pressure drops, energy drains. 9. Dissociation begins. Depersonalisation. Self feels unreal. Derealisation. World feels unreal, or amnesia. Moment erased. 10. Aftermath. Fatigue, shame, headaches, difficulty recalling events, and self-blame. This cycle, repeated enough, becomes an embodied script. The nervous system learns to leap straight from trigger to shutdown, skipping over fight or flight. Spacing out during conflict is not cowardice. It is not indifference. It is the body's last refuge when every other survival door is locked. For survivors, recognizing this truth can soften shame. For those who witness it in others, Understanding it can open compassion, but compassion is only the beginning. In the next parts, we'll explore how dissociation shows up in everyday life, how it becomes both adaptive and maladaptive, and how healing requires not rejecting dissociation, but slowly teaching the body that presence can be safe again. Dissociation in everyday life. When we hear the word dissociation, many of us think of extremes: childhood trauma, abuse, war, and catastrophic events. And it's true, dissociation often begins in contexts of profound overwhelm. But dissociation does not remain confined to those moments. Once written into the nervous system, it becomes a way of responding to life. Sometimes it's subtle, almost invisible. Other times, it interrupts daily functioning. Either way, dissociation is not only about surviving the unbearable, it's also about coping with the ordinary. The everyday faces of dissociation. Most people dissociate more than they realize. It's built into the way our brains work. When you drive home on a familiar route and suddenly realize you don't remember the last 10 minutes, that's dissociation, the autopilot of the nervous system taking over. When you zone out during a boring lecture or endless meeting, staring at the clock without really seeing it, that's dissociation too. On the mild end, this kind of dissociation is adaptive. It allows the brain to conserve energy, to drift when full presence isn't necessary. It's not pathological, it's practical. But when trauma has wired dissociation deeply, these everyday states take on a sharper edge. Daydreaming turns into disappearing. Zoning out becomes losing time. Autopilot becomes absent. What looks normal on the outside hides the reality of a nervous system constantly seeking refuge. Scenario: spacing out the dinner table. Let me give you a scenario that many may recognize. A young adult, let's call her Sarah, is having dinner with her family. The conversation starts light, but soon an old tension arises. Her father makes a critical comment, subtle, dismissive, but enough to sting. Her mother sighs, clearly irritated. Her sibling joins in, teasing in a way that feels less like play and more like ganging up. For Sarah, the moment is familiar. Her nervous system recognizes the pattern. The fight doesn't feel safe. Pushing back has always led to escalation. Flight is impossible. She's at the table, trapped in the ritual of mealtime. Freeze offers a few seconds of stillness, but the scrutiny only grows. So her body does what it has learned. It dissociates. Her gaze drifts to the window. The voices fade into a blur. Time becomes slippery. To her family, she looks withdrawn, disinterested. Someone says, "Why are you always so distant? Don't you care about this family?" But inside, Sarah is not distant by choice. She is surviving. Later, when she retreats to her room, she feels both relief and guilt. Relief, because the numbing spared her from the sharpest edges of criticism. Guilt, because she wasn't really there, and because she's been accused once again of not caring. This is how dissociation functions in daily life. It is not dramatic, not obvious, but it shapes relationships, conversations, and self-perception in profound ways. Autopilot in the mundane. Consider how often we live on autopilot. Driving, commuting, scrolling. In moderation, autopilot is simply efficient. The brain cannot attend to every detail at once, so it creates shortcuts. But when dissociation becomes chronic, autopilot extends into places where presence matters, conversations with loved ones, creative work, and even self-care. I remember times when I'd lose hours to scrolling, not because I wanted to, but because my body had slipped into a state of avoidance. The overstimulation of life pushed me to detach, and the glowing screen provided a perfect numbing agent. Afterwards, I'd feel empty, ashamed, wondering why I had wasted so much time. But in truth, it wasn't wasted. It was survival. My body had chosen absence over collapse. This is why addiction and dissociation are often linked. Substances, behaviors, and technologies all provide externalized forms of numbing. They mimic the body's internal shutdown, offering the same relief with the same costs. Dissociation in relationships. Dissociation shows up heavily in relationships. Arguments end not with resolution, but with silence, because one partner shuts down. Emotional intimacy feels elusive because presence itself is difficult to sustain. Survivors often describe going through the motions of love while internally feeling numb. This is not because they don't care. It's because caring feels dangerous. To be fully present in a relationship is to risk being hurt. Dissociation steps in as a buffer, reducing the risk of pain, but also reducing the possibility of connection. I've experienced this myself. Times when I longed for closeness, but couldn't sustain it, because my nervous system pulled me away. I catch myself nodding through conversations, half there, half elsewhere. It wasn't a lack of love, it was fear. And the fear lived in the body, in pathways carved long before I had words for them. Cultural dissociation. A society on autopilot. It's not just individuals who dissociate. Entire cultures do. Think about the endless scroll of news and social media. Catastrophe after catastrophe, crisis after crisis. At first we respond with outrage, grief, and solidarity. But eventually, the flood becomes too much. The body numbs. We keep scrolling, but the images barely register. This is collective dissociation, society protecting itself from overwhelm by drifting into detachment. Governments and media, consciously or not, exploit this. By saturating the nervous system with fear and stress, they push populations into collapse. People stop resisting not because they agree, but because they're too numbed to fight. Dissociation becomes social control. This is something I explored in the Inversiverse. How systems of power use repetition, fear, and overload to shut down the nervous system. A dissociated population is easier to manage than an enraged one, easier to manipulate than an embodied one. Spiritual and mystical perspectives. Not all dissociation is trauma-driven. Some traditions intentionally cultivate altered states. Shamans enter trance. Monks practice detachment. Mystics describe experiences of being out of body as pathways to transcendence. The difference lies in context and consent. In trauma, dissociation is forced, unwanted, and disempowering. In spiritual practice, dissociation is chosen, guided, and often temporary. One fragment, the other can integrate. Still, the line is blurry. Survivors of trauma sometimes mistake dissociation for mystical experience or vice versa. Both involve stepping out of ordinary reality. Both involve detachment from self or world. The difference is whether the state empowers or disempowers, heals or harms. Shadow reflections. Dissociation and my own behaviors. I've often spoken about the costs of dissociation, but I want to be honest about the shadows too. Dissociation doesn't only protect, it sometimes excuses me from responsibility. There were times I numbed not only because I was overwhelmed, but because I didn't want to face myself. Times I withdrew not only to survive, but to avoid. This is the complexity of dissociation. It's both automatic and sometimes complicated. It's a shield, but it can also become a habit, a way of sidestepping discomfort rather than facing it. And yet, even here, compassion is necessary. Because avoidance, too, is a form of survival. If the system learned that being fully present led to pain, then even avoidance is the echo of old wounds. Philosophy, presence, absence, and being philosophers like Sartre and Heidegger have written about presence and absence, being and nothingness. Dissociation is a lived form of these questions. What does it mean to be in the world when the self can slip away? Sartre spoke of bad faith, the ways we deny our freedom by living inauthentically. Dissociation complicates this. Is it bad faith to disappear when presence is unbearable? Or is it, paradoxically, an act of authenticity, the body declaring honestly, this is too much? For Heidegger, being toward death was central to human existence. Dissociation, in a way, is a rehearsal, a temporary erasure of presence, a small taste of non-being. No wonder it feels both terrifying and strangely calming. The costs of everyday dissociation. So what does all this mean for daily life? The costs are real. Memory. Survivors often struggle with fragmented recall, unable to piece together events. Authenticity. Presence in relationships is compromised, leading to misunderstandings and distance. Productivity. Work and creativity suffer when energy is drained by constant numbing. Identity. Chronic dissociation erodes the sense of self, leaving people wondering who they really are. But again, these costs are not signs of weakness. They are signs of survival strategies stretched beyond their original purpose. Dissociation in everyday life reminds us that trauma doesn't only live in the past. It weaves itself into the present, into meals, conversations, workdays, and even moments of supposed rest. The challenge is not to banish dissociation, but to notice it, to name it when it happens, to meet it with compassion, to ask the body gently, what are you protecting me from right now? Because only then can we begin to create conditions where presence feels safe again. Where can we eat a meal without drifting, argue without vanishing, scroll without numbing? Where everyday life can be lived, not just survived. The costs of dissociation saves lives. That truth cannot be overstated. For children trapped in unsafe homes, for survivors of violence, for anyone cornered without escape, dissociation is the body's most reliable ally. But like all survival strategies, what protects in a crisis can cost dearly in everyday life. Dissociation, when chronic, takes pieces of authenticity, of intimacy, of creativity, and even of identity itself. It is not just the absence of presence. It is the erosion of self. The erosion of authenticity. Authenticity requires presence. To be authentic means to act, speak, and respond from one's true self in the present moment. But dissociation makes presence impossible. When the body has slipped away, when the mind is floating, when the environment feels unreal, authenticity collapses. This is why survivors of chronic trauma often describe themselves as actors. They play roles in conversations, relationships, and workplaces. They smile when required, nod when expected, and speak when demanded. But inside, the self is distant. The words are not fully theirs. I've experienced this dissonance. As a child, I learned quickly how to perform compliance. To nod at teachers, even when I hadn't heard their instructions. To smile faintly when relatives asked if I was okay, even when I wasn't. Later, as an adult, the performances grew more complex. Professionalism in workspaces, charm in social groups, steadiness in relationships. But the truth was often the same. I wasn't fully there. This erosion of authenticity is not trivial. It breeds shame. Survivors ask themselves, who am I really? Am I just a collection of masks? If I'm always half gone, is there even a true me beneath? Dissociation leaves people not just absent from moments, but estranged from themselves. The price paid in intimacy. The deepest cost of dissociation lies in intimacy. To love is to be present. To connect is to be seen and to see. Dissociation interrupts both. In relationships, dissociation often looks like distance. One partner spaces out during an argument, and the other feels ignored or unloved. Attempts at closeness are met with flatness. Physical intimacy can be disrupted too, as the survivor drifts away in moments where presence is most required. This doesn't mean survivors don't love. In fact, the longing for connection is often intense, but love becomes complicated when the nervous system interprets closeness as danger. The body says, to survive, I must not be fully here. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I reflected on how these patterns shaped my own relationships. There were times I desperately wanted closeness, but couldn't hold it. Times I withdrew mid-conversation, leaving my partner feeling abandoned even as I sat right beside them. At times, my nervous system convinced me that presence would only bring rejection, so I drifted instead. The tragic irony is that dissociation, meant to prevent pain, often causes it. Survivors numb to protect themselves, but the numbing wounds those who long for their presence. Intimacy becomes a battlefield, not because of malice, but because of absence. Creativity and expression, silenced by numbing dissociation, also costs expression. Creativity, whether through art, writing, conversation, or work, requires flow. But flow cannot emerge when the body is offline. Dissociation interrupts the very channels through which expression moves. I felt this in my own work. There were times I longed to write but could not find the words. At times I wanted to speak but found my voice muted. Sometimes I sat down to create and found only blankness because my nervous system was numbed. This is why survivors often describe themselves as inconsistent. Bursts of creativity followed by long silences. Periods of productivity followed by burnout. Dissociation is the hidden variable, draining presence, dulling inspiration, interrupting the current of expression. And yet, paradoxically, creativity is also one of the paths out. When survivors find safe spaces to express, creativity itself can rewire the nervous system, reminding the body that presence is not always dangerous. The fragmentation of memory dissociation also disrupts memory. When the hippocampus shuts down under stress, events are not encoded properly. Survivors often report patchy recall, blank spots, or fragmented narratives. This creates not only frustration but self-doubt. People ask, if I can't remember it clearly, did it even happen? Can I trust myself? This doubt is compounded when abusers exploit dissociation through gaslighting, dismissing survivors' accounts as imagined or confused. The result is devastating, a survivor who both lived the trauma and questions whether they did. Dissociation steals not just presence but history. In the Inversiverse, I explored how societies do something similar, rewriting narratives, erasing truths, numbing populations into forgetting. Dissociation at the personal level mirrors dissociation at the cultural level. In both, reality itself becomes slippery, truth itself uncertain. Identity and the self fragment over time. Chronic dissociation fragments identity. The self is no longer cohesive but divided, the presentable mask, the hidden pain, the numbed absence. Survivors often describe feeling like multiple selves, not in the clinical sense of dissociative identity disorder, but in the everyday sense of living compartmentalized lives. As a child, I felt this fragmentation acutely. There was the good version of me that teachers praised, the angry version that exploded under pressure, the silent version that shut down. I didn't understand that these were all parts of the same nervous system adapting to impossible conditions. Instead, I felt fractured, broken, wrong. Later, I learned that many survivors feel this way. Dissociation prevents integration, leaving people with selves that feel disconnected from one another. Authenticity is lost not only outwardly but inwardly. Societal costs, the dissociated culture. It's not just individuals who pay. Societies steeped in dissociation suffer too. When whole populations numb themselves to injustice, when war, poverty, and corruption become background noise, change becomes impossible. Dissociation breeds apathy. People see suffering on their screens daily but scroll past, detached. They witness political lies but shrug, too weary to care. This is dissociation scaled up. The collective nervous system collapsing under constant stress, numbing to survive but losing the capacity for truth and transformation. I spoke about this in Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, where I explored emotions like apathy, envy, and anger. These aren't just personal shadows. They're societal symptoms of dissociation, the cost of a culture that numbs rather than confronts. Shadow behaviors. When dissociation distorts the self, I don't want to present myself as if I've always carried dissociation gracefully. There were times dissociation fed into my shadow behaviors, times when my numbing became neglect, ignoring people who needed me, not out of malice, but because I was absent. Times when detachment turned into defensiveness, when my distance hurt others even as it protected me. This is part of the cost too. Dissociation doesn't only wound the survivor, it ripples outward, touching partners, friends, children, and communities. Presence withheld leaves others feeling abandoned. Authenticity withheld breeds mistrust. Survivors often carry guilt for these ripples, even though they stem from survival rather than choice. The double punishment. Perhaps the deepest cost of dissociation is what I call double punishment. First, punished by the original trauma that made dissociation necessary. Second, punished by others who misinterpret dissociation as coldness, avoidance, or disinterest. This compounds shame. Survivors who already doubt themselves are told, explicitly or implicitly, that they are failing others, that they are too quiet, too distant, too unfeeling. But what looks like failure is actually survival. What looks like absence is the body's last defense. Philosophical and spiritual dimensions. Philosophically, the cost of dissociation raises deep questions. If presence defines existence, then what does it mean to exist when you are absent? Heidegger's being in the world presumes presence, but dissociation complicates this. Can one still be if one is not fully here? Spiritually, dissociation is often framed as disconnection from the soul. Many traditions speak of trauma as soul loss, the fragmentation of the spirit under pain. Healing, then, is described as soul retrieval, bringing the lost parts back. Whether literal or metaphorical, the language resonates. Dissociation feels like absence, and healing feels like return. The costs of dissociation are real. Authenticity eroded, intimacy disrupted, creativity silenced, memory fragmented, identity fractured, presence withheld from self and others alike. But we must hold this truth alongside another. These costs are not signs of weakness. They are the price of survival. Survivors did what they had to do. Dissociation saved them. The costs are tragic, but they are not shameful. The path forward lies not in rejecting dissociation, but in acknowledging both its gift and its theft. To say, thank you for protecting me, and now I want more. I want presence. I want authenticity. I want to live fully again. In the next part, we'll begin to explore what that more looks like, the slow, difficult, but possible path from dissociation to reconnection. Reclaiming presence dissociation teaches the body how to survive by disappearing. It says, if I cannot fight or flee, I will not be here. But healing teaches the body something different. I can stay, I can breathe, I can witness what is happening without being consumed by it. Reclaiming presence is not about erasing dissociation. It's about building capacity for something else, to be in the room, in the moment, in the body, to know that here can be safe, even when the echoes of then rise. The encounter, a moment of projection a few years ago, I had a conversation that tested this capacity. The person across from me kept saying, "You're not interested in getting to know me." They repeated it again and again, like a broken record. The words landed with weight, not because they were true. In fact, the opposite was true. I was genuinely interested. I was trying to connect. I was listening with sincerity. But their repetition had its own kind of power. Every time they said it, I felt tension rise in my body. My chest tightened, my jaw set. The thought flickered. Why am I not being welcomed in my sincerity? Why are they denying what I'm offering? In the past, this would have been enough to push me over the edge. Frustration would have boiled over into anger. I would have snapped back, trying to force them to see my intention, trying to shake off the injustice of being misread. I might have raised my voice, walked out, or withdrawn in cold silence. But in that moment, something different happened. Inside, I laughed, not loudly, not dismissively, but quietly within myself. I recognized the irony. They weren't describing me, they were exposing themselves. Their words, "You're not interested in getting to know me," were not true about me. They were a projection of their own resistance. It was them who couldn't accept me, them who weren't open to connection. And instead of spiraling, I grounded. I took a deep breath. I let the tension soften as much as it could. Flashbacks of old conversations, other times when I'd been misjudged or rejected, flew through my mind, but this time I didn't lose myself in them. I stayed. I breathed. I chose not to lose my cool. For once, I didn't collapse into dissociation, nor did I explode into anger. I stayed present in the moment. The nervous system breakdown. What happened inside my body that day is worth unpacking because it illustrates the fragile dance between dissociation and presence. 1. Trigger recognition. The repeated phrase acted like a cue. My nervous system recognized the accusation, "You're not interested," as a threat to belonging, one of the deepest human needs. 2. Sympathetic arousal. My body prepared for fight. Tension rose in my chest and jaw, and my mind flashed with images of past injustices. Frustration and irritation simmered. 3. Flashback loop. The hippocampus pulled up old files, past moments when I had been dismissed, accused, or misunderstood. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, fired as if those past experiences were happening again. 4. Dissociation pull. For a split second, I felt the pull of dissociation. That familiar urge to drift, to check out, to escape the unbearable tension. 5. Grounding intervention. Instead, I breathed. Deep, deliberate, vagus nerve activating breaths. I oriented myself. I am here in this moment, not back then. 6. Reframe and recognition. I recognized the projection. The words were not about me, they were about them. This recognition broke the loop. My body could stand down. This sequence is crucial because it shows that presence is not automatic. It must be chosen moment by moment with tools that give the nervous system another option besides dissociation. Projection as a nervous system trigger projection is destabilizing because it attacks the core of identity. When someone insists that you are something you are not, uncaring, uninterested, unworthy, the nervous system reacts as if reality itself is under threat. For survivors of trauma, projection is particularly dangerous. It mirrors old experiences of gaslighting, where abusers dismissed or distorted lived reality. The body recognizes the pattern instantly. This is unsafe. I am not being seen. The danger is not only external. Projection can trick us into internalizing lies. When told repeatedly that we are uncaring, the nervous system begins to question. Maybe I am. Maybe they're right. This internalization compounds shame, pushing the body further toward collapse. Recognizing projection as not mine is therefore a crucial act of reclaiming presence. It allows the body to differentiate between what belongs to me and what belongs to them. It's a boundary drawn not only in the mind but in the nervous system. Somatic practices for presence. So how do we reclaim presence when dissociation is the default? The answer lies in somatic practices, body-based strategies that anchor the nervous system in the present. 1. Grounding through breath. Breathing deeply and slowly signals safety to the vagus nerve. In that conversation, I used a simple technique. Inhale to the count of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6. The extended exhale activates the parasympathetic system, calming arousal and preventing shutdown. 2. Orienting the senses. When flashbacks rise, orienting can interrupt them. Look around the room. Name 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you feel against your skin. This tells the body, I am here, not there. This is now, not then. 3. Naming the now language can be grounding too. Saying quietly to oneself, I'm sitting in this chair. I'm talking to this person. The past is not happening now. Words, when used consciously, can re-anchor the mind in the present. 4. Physical anchors. Some people carry grounding objects, a stone, a bracelet, something tactile. Touching it during moments of overwhelm reminds the body of continuity and safety. These practices are deceptively simple, but their simplicity is their power. Dissociation thrives in overwhelm. Grounding interrupts overwhelm with clarity. Spiritual and philosophical views. Reclaiming presence is not only biological, it is also philosophical and spiritual. Mindfulness traditions teach that presence is the only place life truly happens. The past is memory, the future is imagination, and only now is real. Dissociation steals now, mindfulness reclaims it. Indigenous practices often emphasize orientation to land and ancestors. Presence is not just personal but relational, being in right relationship with place, community, and spirit. This perspective reframes grounding as connection, not just coping. Mystical traditions speak of embodiment as incarnation. To be in the body is to be fully human, fully alive. Dissociation, then, is not only a psychological absence but a spiritual exile. Presence is the path home. Philosophically, presence also raises questions of authenticity. Heidegger spoke of being in the world as the essence of existence. To dissociate is, in some sense, to step out of being. To reclaim presence is to step back into existence itself. Personal reflection. Staying present, despite the pull. Looking back at that conversation, what strikes me most is not the words exchanged, but the choice I made in my body. For years, I didn't have that choice. Dissociation was automatic. Projection was enough to send me spiraling into frustration or anger, into collapse, into absence. But on that day, I chose differently. Not perfectly, not without tension, but differently. I breathed, I noticed, I reframed, and I stayed. That moment wasn't just about one conversation. It was about reclaiming my nervous system from the grip of old scripts. It was about proving to myself that presence was possible, even under pressure. And here's the truth. If I can do it once, I can do it again. If I can stay present in one difficult moment, I can build that capacity for more. Presence, like dissociation, becomes a habit. But unlike dissociation, it is a habit that expands life rather than erases it. Dissociation was once necessary. It protected me as a child, as an adult, in moments when the world was too much. It will always be part of my nervous system's repertoire. But it is not destiny. Presence is possible. Not always, not perfectly, but more and more. Every time I breathe through tension, every time I recognize projection as not mine, every time I name the now, I teach my body a new story. Reclaiming presence is not about condemning dissociation. It's about thanking it for its service and then choosing another way. It's about honoring survival while leaning into life. Because to be present is to be alive, and life, even with its pain, even with its projections, is worth inhabiting. Final thoughts of dissociation as survival. As we draw this episode to a close, I want to pause with gratitude. Gratitude for you listening, gratitude for the complexity of the human body, and gratitude even for dissociation itself. It's easy to vilify dissociation. Easy to call it avoidance, weakness, or dysfunction. But what we've explored today reminds us of something far deeper. Dissociation is survival. It is not cowardice, but courage in disguise. It is the body saying, I will not let you feel the full weight of this. I will protect you by carrying it for you. Think of what that means. The body, your own body, has carried you through the unbearable. It has shielded you in moments when no one else could. It has allowed you to endure what might otherwise have broken you. That deserves recognition. That deserves respect. But survival, as necessary as it is not the same as living. Dissociation saves, but it also steals. It removes us from pain, but in doing so, it removes us from presence, from intimacy, from creativity, from authenticity, from ourselves. It fragments memory, it fractures identity, it numbs love. The paradox of dissociation is that it is both a gift and a thief. To honor it fully, we must hold both truths in our hands. An invitation to reflect. Where in your life have you noticed dissociation protecting you? What did it allow you to survive? And what has it cost you in love, in presence, in selfhood? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones, because it is in naming both the gift and the theft that we begin to move toward integration. You might take a moment this week to journal about it. Write down one memory where dissociation helped you. Then write down one place where it limited you. See both on the page, honor both as part of your story. The path to reclaiming presence. What we've seen today is that presence is not automatic. Dissociation happens reflexively, without thought. Presence, on the other hand, must be cultivated. It requires tools, practices, and patience, grounding in the body, orienting the senses, naming the now, breathing with intention, carrying small anchors that tether you when the pull to drift becomes strong. Presence is a muscle, and like any muscle, it grows through repetition. Every small act of grounding is a signal to the nervous system. I am safe here. I can stay here. And over time, those signals accumulate. Over time, the nervous system learns that collapse is not the only option, that the world, despite its dangers, also contains safety. That connection can be possible, that intimacy can be endured, that love can be lived. This is slow work. It does not happen in a week or a month, but it does happen. And I can say that not just as someone who has studied it, but as someone who has lived it. My own path of reclaiming for years, dissociation carried me. It protected me when I was small, when the world was loud, when expectations pressed in. It shielded me in classrooms, in social groups, in relationships. It was my silent ally, even when I didn't understand it. But it also cost me. It cost me presence in moments I longed to inhabit. It cost me intimacy with people I cared about. It cost me confidence in myself. The turning point came not from rejecting dissociation, but from reframing it. Stopped asking, why am I so weak? Why can't I stay? And started saying, thank you for keeping me alive. But I want more now. I want to live. That shift opened the door to grounding, to mindfulness, to practices that anchored me back in the present. And slowly, moment by moment, I began to reclaim presence. Not perfectly, not always, but enough. And each time I reclaimed it, even for a breath, even for a second, something in me healed. Something in me remembered that safety could exist without absence, from survival to integration, which brings us to where we are headed next. Dissociation shows us how the body survives. Integration shows us how the body heals. In the next episode, episode 20, Integration, the body's path to wholeness, we'll pull this arc together. We'll move from trauma memory to embodied healing. We'll explore what it looks like to choose safety without collapse, to rebuild trust in the body, to reclaim life as more than survival. Because survival, while honorable, is not the destination. The destination is wholeness. The destination is presence. The destination is life lived fully in the body, not just endured by it. So as we close today, I want to leave you with this. Dissociation was never your fault. It was never weakness. It was the most intelligent choice your body could make in impossible circumstances. But you are not destined to remain in that state forever. You have within you the capacity to breathe, to ground, to name the now, to choose presence again and again. Each choice is small, but together they are life-changing. Dissociation may have been your story, but it is not your whole story. The body that once learned to disappear can also learn to return. And in that return lies the possibility of healing, of connection, of love. You've been listening to The Body Knows. Until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for walking this path with me. I hope this episode offered not just insight, but compassion for yourself, for others, and for the parts of you that once needed to disappear to survive. You are more than your absence. You are the presence that remains. James Miller.